Out there, the cold wasn't an enemy. It was a teacher. It didn't strike fast. It waited. No walls, no trees, no mercy. Only the wind rolling forever, shaping the land like a slow hand of ice. Inside our homes, heaters hum and lights glow warm. Still, we shiver. But out there on the endless plains, a single figure stood wrapped in hide-breathing frost into a world without end. He wasn't lost. He was home, because endurance wasn't comfort, it was silence. And silence was survival. Out there, the world was flat, a sea of frozen grass that never ended. No trees to break the wind, no cliffs to hide behind, only sky above, and a cold that came from every direction. It didn't matter how thick your hide was. If the wind found you, it would take your warmth grain by grain. He knew that. They all did. So before the teepee rose, before the fire was lit, they searched. Not for beauty, but for shelter that wasn't there. They studied the land like hunters read tracks. The Lakota, the Mandan men who walked the wind. They read the snowdrifts, the shape of a ridge, the curl of grass that bent differently when the ground dipped low. Where the wind slowed, they built. Sometimes near a buffalo wallow, sometimes behind a coulee or a shallow ridge carved by old rain. It didn't look like much, just a small dip in the earth, but that curve could mean the difference between life and frost. Years later, scientists tested it, University of Wyoming, 2008. Wind speed dropped by nearly 40% behind those same ridges. 40% less wind. Could be the line between breathing and freezing. He didn't call it strategy. He called it sense. You don't fight the plains. You move with them. Shelter didn't begin with building. It began with listening. Because even the wind has shadows. And the wise always stood inside them. They couldn't carry forests. Only hides, soft, heavy breathing. Out on the plains, there was no timber to wall the cold away. The wind would crawl through every seam, through every careless stitch. So they learned to make the hide itself alive, not sealed breathing. The Lakota and Mandan stretched thick bison skins over poles of willow and ash. 2 layers, one inside, one out, with air trapped between them like a secret flame. At the top, smoke flaps opened and closed with the wind. It wasn't decoration, it was control. When the air rose, the teepee breathed with it. Moisture escaped. Heat stayed. Frost never formed inside. In 1936, the Smithsonian rebuilt one. Same hide, same wind, same fire. The air inside stayed 7 degrees warmer, 7 degrees enough to turn death into sleep. They didn't call it insulation. They called it balance. A wall that moved like breath, not like brick. The cold pressed in, the fire sighed out, and somewhere between them, warmth lived. That was the secret. Warmth came not from sealing the world out, but from breathing with it. The ground was the real thief, not the wind, not the snow. Cold crept upward, silent and steady through the soil itself, pulling warmth from the body until the heart slowed its rhythm. You could build a fire, you could wear hide, but if you slept on frozen earth, you wouldn't wake warm. They learned that early, so before they built walls or lit fires, the Lakota, the Mandan, the people of the plains, they built the ground. First came the willow mats, woven tight and laid flat. Then sagebrush lights, springy, holding air. On top, hides or bundles of reeds sealed it all together. Each layer trapped breath, tiny pockets of still air that kept the cold from climbing. They didn't have words for thermal conduction. They just knew what death felt like through the floor. Archaeologists found proof of it. At Fort Clark in 1936, they uncovered old winter lodges, packed earth still layered with reed mats fibers intact after 100 winters. The science came later, but the wisdom was already buried in the dirt. It wasn't the fire that saved them, it was what they built beneath it. Because warmth doesn't start from the top, it rises from below. They built it that way on purpose. Not from the fire down, but from the ground up, one quiet layer at a time. Out there, the storm didn't share its fire. Alone, a man had to carry his own. No circle of warmth, no voices, no glow, but his breath. The cold stripped everything except the will to endure. He learned the oldest rule of the plains: if you lose heat, you lose hours. So they built warmth inside their own skin. Hunters rubbed bear grease across their bodies, thick, oily sealing every pore against the wind. Some mixed it with ash or fat until their skin shone dull gray under the moon. It wasn't for comfort. It was for survival. Each layer held the body's fire where it belonged inside, and when they moved slow. Never rushing, never sweating, because sweat in sub-zero was death that crept in wet. Among the Lakota, the elders said the wise man never sweated in winter. Eagle Shield told that story in 1910, not as legend, but as memory. Those who learned control lived to see the thaw. Those who fought the cold with speed froze in their pride. The human furnace wasn't lit by muscle, it was lit by patience. The discipline wasn't in the arms or legs, it was in the mind. To move steady, to breathe slow, to hold the fire without letting it escape. They didn't chase warmth, they became it. Because survival wasn't in firewood, it was in restraint. And restraint was warmth that never burned out. When the wind howled, the animals vanished. Wolves dug into snow. Buffalo turned their backs to the storm. And the people did the same, because the danger wasn't just the cold, it was the noise. The endless roar that scraped the mind hour after hour until even strong hearts began to tremble. The Great Plains could howl like a living thing. The teepee walls shook. The air groaned. Sleep turned thin like the breath of a dying fire. So they built armor not from wood or stone, but from silence. Snow became their ally. They shoveled it high around the tent's base, packing it tight into curved mounds. Buffalo hides hung over the snow wall, dull and heavy, soaking up the sound. When the wind struck, it split softened, vanished into the curve. The noise that once screamed became a whisper, and inside, a person could rest again. Decades later, a study from the University of Manitoba tested the idea. Snow mounds dropped wind noise by 18 to 24 decibels, enough to turn a storm into a hum, enough to bring peace back to a tired mind. They didn't fight the wind, they muted it, because survival wasn't only heat and food, it was quiet. It was the space to think. And on the plains, silence was warmth, the armor you couldn't see but always felt. Even in solitude, they didn't sleep at random. Every inch of the teepee had a reason. Where the fire burned, where the breath rose, where the cold crept, they mapped it all. Because out there, warmth wasn't luck. It was geometry. The wise slept close, but never too close. Diagonal to the hearth, not in front of it, not beside it. That angle let the heat roll down the body line, not waste upward into smoke. Behind them, hides were raised on poles, tilted just enough to reflect heat back. A silent mirror of warmth, each detail small but earned through winters that tested patience more than strength. At Fort Randall in 1891, archaeologists found proof burnt hide panels still standing behind old sleeping pits charred black from years of use. They weren't decorations. They were walls of memory built to bend warmth like light. They slept like builders, not wanderers. Every pole, every hide, every breath measured, deliberate. The teepee was a machine of survival, tuned by instinct and math the hand could feel. Even when the wind screamed outside, inside warmth moved like a circle from fire to hide from hide to body, from breath back to fire. They didn't just survive the cold, they designed around it. Because in the geometry of survival, every angle meant life. Alone didn't mean unguarded. On the plains, danger didn't always roar, sometimes it crept. Coyotes, wolves, even raiders moved through the dark, following the sound of sleep and the smell of life. A man could be warm and still not safe, so he built a circle, small, invisible, but alive. 3 dogs tied in a triangle around the camp, not close enough to tangle, not far enough to miss a sound. Their ears caught what the wind carried first. When they stirred, he listened. When they growled, he reached. Around his teepee, he shaped the snow, low walls, curved and firm. They didn't just block the wind, they broke sound. The air folded differently there, soft, uneven, impossible for noise to travel clean. Each gust lost its edge before it touched him. The silence he made became his shield, Weapons lay within arm's reach, a bow, a blade, maybe a club carved from frozen ash. Nothing loud, nothing wasted, because noise was danger and calm was control. In 1849, a man named G.W. Kingsley wrote of Pawnee winter camps, a ring of life around one man. Dogs, snow fire, and breath all listening together. Awareness replaced numbers. Caution replaced fear. He didn't have walls or guards. He had discipline, and that was enough. Because solitude wasn't weakness, it was readiness. The kind that survives the night and wakes before the wind. Out there, the cold was never beaten. It was understood. They didn't call it bravery, they called it listening. Listening to the wind, to the snow, to the silence between heartbeats. Because the plains never spoke in words. They spoke in warnings, quiet, patient, honest. Every movement was a conversation. When they built, the land answered. When they rested, the air shifted. If they disrespected it, the cold took them. If they listened, it spared them. That was the law, older than any tribe, older than memory itself. On the Great Plains, loneliness wasn't punishment. It was training. A place where the weak shouted and vanished, but the patient whispered and survived. They learned that the earth doesn't comfort, it teaches. It shows you your limits. It teaches you not to waste breath, not to fight wind, and not to mistake stillness for surrender. The Lakota, the Mandan, the Pawnee, they carried no arrogance into the storm. They walked with it. Every snowflake was a signal, every night a test of balance between warmth and will. And through it all, they discovered something rare, that endurance isn't strength, it's respect. Respect for the land, for silence, for themselves. Because the cold has no mercy, but it has memory. It remembers who listens and who doesn't. And in that frozen silence, they earned something deeper than warmth. They earned understanding. The fire fades. Its smoke drifts upward, thin, slow, disappearing into the night. The plains fall quiet again, as they always do. But warmth doesn't vanish. It lingers in the hides in the earth, in the memory of how they stood against the wind. Endurance was never loud. It didn't shout or boast. It waited, patient, steady human. A kind of strength that breathes, not burns. Out there, they didn't fight the cold. They worked with it. Every storm was a teacher. Every night, a test of silence. They learned to listen until even the wind spoke softly. The fire dies. The world turns gray again. And still something remains. The memory of hands that built warmth from nothing. The echo of people who found life inside stillness. Because survival was never a battle. It was a conversation between man and winter, between flame and frost, between silence and endurance. Stay by the fire.